my friends, and I made a list of all the things you don't have. It's a long list, she laughed, dumping me for another guy. So I changed my number and my life. Now she's trying to get back in my life because her list is even longer. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. The hum of the old watchmaker's lathe was the most soothing sound in the world to me. It was a Friday night, and while most people were out chasing the weekend, I was in my little workshop, a converted spare room in the back of the apartment I shared with my girlfriend, Qley. She called it my hobbit hole. I liked the sound of it. It was where I was happiest, surrounded by tiny gears, delicate springs, and the rich scent of machine oil. I felt a kind of peace that nothing else could give me. I was good at this. Not in a flashy, impressive way, but in a quiet, deeply satisfying way. I could take something broken, something a century old and given up for dead, and breathe life back into it. I was hunched over an early 20th century trench watch, a delicate piece of history, when my phone vibrated on the workbench. It was Qley. I smiled, reaching for it, but the sound of her voice on the other end was too loud, too high-pitched. She was out with her friends again. I could hear the tinny backdrop of a bar and a chorus of laughter that wasn't quite friendly. Hey, what's up? I asked, my voice still quiet. Oh, girls' night, she slurred. Just talking about life. Our futures. Grown-up things. I took a breath, letting the jab slide off my back. It wasn't a new feeling. For the past year, Qley had been a constant low-grade fever in my life. She'd always been a social climber, but lately, it had escalated into a frantic, public performance. Our 6 years together, the last 3 of them living here, had become a point of contention. She'd constantly post about her goals and vision boards on Instagram, and I felt less and less like a partner and more like a background character she was trying to write out of the script. My quiet contentment was, to her, a fatal flaw. Sounds fun, I said, trying to ignore the condescension dripping from her voice. Just doing some work here. Yeah, about that, she said, and her tone changed. It wasn't playful anymore. It was cold, vicious. We were just talking about how you're, so content. It's actually kind of cute, in a sad way. I didn't respond. I knew where this was going, and the dread was a familiar, heavy stone in my stomach. She took my silence as a green light. My friends and I just realized something. We made a list of all the things you don't have. It's a long list, Alex. A really long list. A real man should have a real life by now, not this. You're not a prize, you're a project I don't have time for. The words hit me. Hard. It wasn't just a dig. It was a complete and utter dismissal of who I was, of the life I had chosen, of the years we had shared. The worst part was her smug laughter after she said it. The sound of her friends giggling in the background was a chorus of contempt. It was all a joke to them. My life was a joke to them. My entire existence was a punchline. I felt the blood drain from my face, but a different kind of heat began to rise in its place. A cold, hard certainty. The hum of the lathe, which was once so soothing, now felt like a buzz in my ears, a white noise over the ringing of her laugh. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing to say. I just listened to her breathe on the other end of the line, waiting for me to react, to get upset, to ask what was wrong. I gave her none of it. I simply hung up the phone and placed it back on the workbench, the silence of the room a welcome relief. My hands, which had been so steady just moments before, were now shaking. I picked up the tiny timepiece again and went back to work. But I wasn't just fixing a watch anymore. I was beginning to put myself back together, one silent, deliberate moment at a time. The next morning, the apartment was a tomb of tension. The air felt thick, heavy with the things left unsaid on the phone the night before. I was in the kitchen, silently making coffee. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. There was no point in asking for an explanation she had already given, no matter how cruel. Finally, she sighed dramatically and put her phone down. We need to talk. Okay, I said, my voice flat, giving her nothing to work with. Look, this isn't working for me anymore, she began, her tone rehearsed, like she had practiced this conversation in front of a mirror. I need more. You're just so content. You don't want to climb. You don't want to grow. You're just comfortable. I stared at her, a strange distance settling over me. The woman I once knew, the one I had shared 6 years of my life with, was gone. In her place was a stranger giving me a performance review. She continued, gathering steam and confidence as she went on. I've met someone who gets it, who understands my vision. His name is Julian. He's a tech founder. He has an office with a skyline view and travels for business every month. He gets it. He's everything you're not. She paused, expecting a reaction. She was waiting for me to get angry, to get hurt, to demand to know what I did wrong. But I just stood there, stirring my coffee, giving her nothing. This seemed to frustrate her more than anything else. Her voice grew sharper, more defensive. You should honestly thank me for doing this now instead of later. You were holding me back, Alex. I'm an investor, and you were a stock that just wasn't appreciating. You'll find someone who fits your little life. But I deserve more. The words were like stones, one after another, building a wall between us. My quiet life, my passion, my love for her, all of it was being devalued and tossed aside like a cheap trinket. A strange calm washed over me, a feeling of clarity I hadn't had in months. The truth was, she wasn't just leaving me. She was publicly, condescendingly, and smugly proving her point. She had to be right. She had to be better. When she finished, she stood there, looking at me, her arms crossed. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in a while. I saw the empty ambition in her eyes, the desperation masked as superiority. My love for her was completely gone. I didn't feel sad or angry. I felt nothing. I simply put my coffee mug down. Okay, I said again, my voice as calm and steady as a lake. I understand. I walked past her, out of the kitchen, and into my workshop. I picked up a duffel bag from the closet and began to pack a few essentials. She followed me, confusion and anger in her eyes. What are you doing? She asked, her voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. I'm moving out, I said, pulling a sweatshirt from a drawer. I'll have my things out by the end of the day. Just like that, she sputtered. Aren't you going to fight for me? To talk about it. I paused, looking at her. No, you've made your decision. You said what you needed to say. There's nothing left to talk about. You deserve more, and I'm not a stock that appreciates on demand. I'm a man who will have his things packed by the end of the day. Good luck with Julian. And with that, I went back to packing, my heart quiet and my hands steady once more. The next few weeks were a strange, hollow existence. I moved in with my friend, Dan, whose spare bedroom was just big enough for a bed and a few boxes of my essentials. The absence of my workshop was like a phantom limb, an ache I couldn't ignore. But the quiet was a kind of balm. There were no more passive-aggressive comments, no more sighs of disappointment, no more lectures on ambition. Just a deep, profound silence where all the contempt had once lived. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to tell her something, a funny observation or a thought about a watch I was working on, and then I would remember. The memory of her voice, her cruel, laughing voice, came back, sharp and clear every single time. It wasn't sadness that filled the void. It was an emptiness that was almost peaceful. I didn't want to be angry. I just wanted to disappear. The first step was to change my number. The second was to go dark on social media. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't post a vague, dramatic quote. I simply deactivated everything and became a ghost. It wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of self-preservation. I needed to build a life that was mine alone, a life that couldn't be judged and found wanting by a jury of strangers on the internet. I didn't try to get updates, but news of Qley's new life filtered through the mutual friends we shared, an inevitable gossip train on its way to me. The story started off as glowing reports. Julian was a visionary, an absolute catch. He took her to expensive restaurants and brought her on extravagant trips. Her Instagram was flooded with pictures of designer bags and lavish dinners. She was living her best life, and every post was a silent jab at the list of things I didn't have. But as the months went on, the posts became less frequent and the tone of the gossip shifted. Dan and our other friends would share snippets of information with a kind of grim satisfaction. Julian, it turned out, was not the generous, charming man Qley had made him out to be. His company wasn't a success. It was a struggling startup living on fumes and venture capital. The lavish gifts weren't from a place of wealth, but from a place of desperation, a way to impress people without having to do the hard work. He was a master manipulator, emotionally controlling and demanding. He would demand that Qley do things for him, and when she refused, he would call her unsupportive and toxic. He was turning her into an unpaid assistant and a trophy to be paraded around. The last few months, before the final, dramatic crash, were particularly telling. Julian, it turned out, was more of a user than a partner. He got what he wanted from Qley, the social connections, the emotional support, and a place to stay. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he left. One day, he simply blocked her on everything and ghosted her, leaving her with an empty apartment, maxed out credit cards, and no explanation. Her friends, the same ones who had helped her create the list of my supposed failures, had grown tired of her constant complaining. They had their own lives to live and were not willing to spend their time listening to her drone on about her mistakes. She had used them to get where she wanted to go, and now that she had hit rock bottom, they were nowhere to be found. The woman who had everything, the car, the job, the flashy life, had nothing. She was broke, isolated, and, worst of all, irrelevant. The life she had built on a foundation of my betrayal was crumbling before my eyes, and I wasn't even there to see it. I was somewhere else, building a new one on a solid foundation of my own. Months went by, and the silence from Qley was finally broken. The first attempts were weak, coming from our mutual friend, Sarah. I saw a text come through on my new number. "Hey, it's Sarah. I know you're probably mad, but Chloe's not doing well. She really needs to talk to you." I read it, stared at the words for a moment, and deleted it without a second thought. Sarah tried again a week later. "Please, just be the bigger person. She made a mistake, and she regrets it." I left her on read, not because I was mad, but because the words didn't even register. They were a problem from another life. The text stopped, but a few days later, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. I lifted the phone to my ear. "Alex? It's Qley." Her voice was a cracked, desperate sound, a far cry from the smug, laughing tone I remembered. She sounded like a drowning person grabbing for a life preserver. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I was an idiot. Julian was a mistake. Everything was a mistake. I miss our life. I miss the calm. I miss you. I listened, my face devoid of emotion. I didn't feel a flicker of pity or anger. I just felt nothing. "I have to go," I said and hung up. The next day, she called again and I ignored it. Then she called again and again until I finally blocked the number. But she wouldn't give up. The next week, another unknown number. The calls came from different numbers with the same message. "Please, Alex, just talk to me. I'm sorry. I've changed." She was reaching for me, but the hand she was reaching with was the same one that had pushed me away. A few days later, a cold, gray Saturday afternoon, I was at a local coffee shop. I was meeting a client to hand over a custom-built watch, a beautiful 1950s piece with a deep blue face. I was proud of my work. My small online business was doing well, and I had a waiting list of clients. I was talking about the history of the piece when I saw her. Qley was standing in the doorway, looking pale and haggard, a cheap knockoff of the woman I had once known. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her expensive clothes looked cheap and ill-fitting. She saw me and her face lit up, a glimmer of hope in the wreckage of her life. She approached my table, a desperate, hungry look on her face. "Alex," she said, her voice thin and full of false emotion. "Can we talk?" I looked at her, then at my client, and back at her. I motioned for my client to step aside for a moment. He nodded, confused, and took a few steps back. "Qley," I said, my voice quiet, calm, and utterly final. "There's nothing to talk about." "Yes, there is," she pleaded, her eyes welling with tears. "I was an idiot. I let those people get in my head. Julian was a mistake. He used me and left me with nothing. I know I was wrong about everything. I miss our quiet life. I miss the apartment, the way we used to talk. I miss us." I listened to her, my expression blank. I felt no rage, no pity, no vindication. Just a deep, profound indifference. The woman in front of me was a ghost from a past life. "I remember that list," I said, my voice steady, my eyes fixed on hers. "The one you and your friends made. It was a list of all the things I didn't have. A fancy car, a high-paying job, a glamorous life. It was a long list. You said I wasn't an investment. I was a liability." I paused, letting my words sink in. I didn't have those things then, and I don't have them now. The difference is, I don't need them. I don't need them to feel worthy or to be happy. It looks like the list of things you don't have is a lot longer than mine ever was. You don't have a partner, a stable life, or a real purpose. You don't have a home, and you don't have a real friend in the world who won't hang up on you. You sold all of that for a fake life, and now you have nothing. She stared at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. My words had cut through her facade and revealed the empty shell beneath. I turned back to my client, picking up the watch. I was done. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm and professional. "I have to get back to my client. I've moved on. I suggest you do the same." I didn't wait for her to respond. I just walked away, leaving her standing there, alone, with nothing but the long list of all the things she had lost. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Share it in the comments.